The night Portland buried itself under a curtain of November rain was the same night Daphne Harlow pressed a pen to paper and felt something inside her go permanently quiet. She was on the 37th floor of a downtown office building, in a conference room where the chairs cost more than her first car. Ethan Caldwell sat at the far end of the table, one leg crossed over the other, scrolling something on his phone with the mild impatience of a man waiting for an overdue car wash. He had not looked at her since she walked in. He had not offered her a glass of water. The papers were already organized in a neat packet on her side of the table. Divorce decree, property division, settlement terms. Ethan's lawyer, a compact man with square glasses, slid the packet half an inch closer. Daphne, whenever you're ready. She wasn't ready. She had found out she was pregnant that morning. 7 weeks, the nurse practitioner had said with a careful smile, handing her a pamphlet she'd folded into her coat pocket without reading. She had sat in the clinic parking lot for 20 minutes before driving here, because she didn't know what else to do. And canceling felt like losing something she hadn't decided to lose yet. Ethan hadn't asked how she was. He hadn't asked anything. His phone buzzed softly, and he silenced it with one thumb without looking up. She picked up the pen. Later, she would not remember the physical sensation of signing her name. She would only remember the rain hammering the floor-to-ceiling windows, the faint smell of Ethan's cologne from 15 feet away. The same cologne he'd worn on their first date, which she now understood as a kind of cruelty the universe had arranged in advance. And the sound of her own breath, too shallow, like someone running who didn't know where to stop. When the elevator doors opened to the parking garage, a cold gust rolled through, and Daphne walked until her back found a concrete pillar, and her legs decided they were finished cooperating. She slid down. Her coat spread on the oil-stained floor. She pressed one hand flat against the cold concrete, and one hand against her abdomen, and she made a sound that wasn't quite words. An involuntary sound, the sound a chest makes when it caves inward. Stay, she thought. Please just stay. She had built the Caldwell Riverside Gardens with her hands. Not literally. She hadn't laid the stone or bent the rebar, but she had drawn every curve of it, beginning in a graduate school sketchbook 8 years ago, back when she was 29, and Portland was just a city she'd chosen on a map because she liked rain and didn't know anyone there and wanted to prove she could survive either of those things. The concept had started as her thesis project, a living waterfront corridor, permeable surfaces layered with native grasses, a series of shallow bioswales that became reflecting pools at dusk, oriented to hold the city's light at the specific angle Portland's clouds permitted it. Her thesis advisor had called it quietly visionary. She had kept every sketchbook. She met Ethan Caldwell 3 years later, at a developers networking dinner she'd almost skipped. He was building a stretch of riverfront property and needed a landscape architect who could make it feel intentional rather than expensive, which was, he said at their first real meeting, a harder problem than it sounded. She had opened her laptop and shown him her thesis project. He'd gone very still. "This is exactly what I've been trying to describe," he said. "How long did it take you to come up with this?" "About 7 years," she answered, which was true. By the time the Riverside Gardens opened to the public, a ribbon cutting covered by 3 national design magazines and 2 architectural journals, Daphne was Ethan's wife. She had been for 2 years. She had also, somewhere in those 2 years, signed a prenuptial NDA covering intellectual property developed in the course of the marriage and related business activities. A document Ethan's team had assembled. His lawyer had walked her through it in 20 minutes, assuring her it was standard language, the kind every executive couple signed. She had been in love. She had trusted the word standard. 2 weeks after the Riverside Gardens received the Urban Design Excellence Award, presented to Ethan Caldwell, described in every press release as the project's visionary developer, Daphne's name appearing once in the program credits, as landscape design consultant. He told her the marriage wasn't working. She had not seen it coming. That was the part that kept reassembling itself in her chest at 3 a.m., the sheer geometric shock of not seeing it coming. She left Portland on a gray Tuesday morning with 2 suitcases, her laptop, her graduate school sketchbooks, and the pamphlet she still hadn't read. Her college roommate, Priya, had a spare room in Boston, and had offered it with the particular gentleness of someone who had been watching from a distance, and was not surprised but was very sorry. Boston smelled different than Portland, sharper, older, less forgiving. Daphne found it harder to disappear into, which was, she came to understand, probably what she needed. A city that demanded your attention instead of wrapping around you like permission to hide. She worked remotely for a Seattle firm, reviewing drainage plans and street tree specifications. The kind of work she could do from a kitchen table at 6 in the morning, when the nausea was bad enough to keep her upright, but not so bad she couldn't hold a cursor still. The baby had stopped being a concept and become a specific thing, a heartbeat on a clinic monitor in Cambridge, fast and stubborn, already its own argument for existing. She went to appointments alone. She made soup. She walked the esplanade in the mornings when the river was still gray and the geese were territorial and the city was just warming up. She was not healing, exactly, but she was doing something that might eventually become healing. Some days she could feel the difference. She met Jonas Beckett on a Thursday in late October. He was standing in the architecture section of a bookstore in Back Bay, holding a monograph on Scandinavian landscape design and reading the back cover with the focused attention most people reserved for medical documents. He was tall, with the kind of quietness that takes up space without apologizing for itself. When Daphne reached past him for a book on the same shelf, he stepped aside without making it a performance. "Sorry," she said anyway, out of habit. "Don't be." He glanced at the book she'd pulled. "That one's better than the one I'm holding." "The photography is better," she agreed. "The analysis is thinner." He looked at her then with a mild curiosity that wasn't intrusive. "Do you work in landscape?" "I used to," she caught herself. I still do." She didn't think about him afterward, or at least she told herself she didn't. But he was there the following Thursday and the one after that, and eventually it became the kind of thing where two people who recognize each other in a place start leaving room in their schedules for it, without saying that out loud. Jonas Beckett, she learned over those weeks, was an investor with a particular interest in urban development and public space. He had strong opinions about cities, and few opinions about things that were none of his business. He brought coffee sometimes. He didn't ask about Portland. When she mentioned, almost by accident, that she designed a project that won a national award and she hadn't been invited to the ceremony, he was quiet for a moment and then said, "That's a specific kind of theft. Not that must have been hard, or I'm sure it wasn't intentional. Just the correct word." She told him she was pregnant on a Tuesday evening when the wind off the river was mean enough to make you reconsider everything. He didn't say anything dramatic. He said, "Are you all right?" And when she laughed, because she didn't know how to answer that, he laughed too carefully and then asked, "What do you need right now?" Nobody had asked her that in months. While Daphne was slowly remembering what it felt like to take up space in a room, Ethan Caldwell was preparing to take Caldwell Properties public. The IPO was the culmination of 6 years of positioning. The Riverside Gardens development was the flagship asset, the proof of concept, the brand maker. The thing that showed Caldwell Properties wasn't just building luxury condominiums, but shaping cities. Every investor deck attributed its success to Ethan's singular vision. The valuation was built, in significant part, on the design, on the specific intelligence of its concept. He was, by then, publicly engaged to Lexi Farrow, a social media personality with 4 million followers, and the instinct for a camera angle that separates the talented from the remarkably successful. She wore the ring on every platform. She called him her visionary. She did not know, and did not ask, anything about how the Riverside Gardens had actually come to exist. Ethan's mother, Eleanor Caldwell, who had quietly loved Daphne in the particular way older women love daughters-in-law who remind them of someone they used to be, had said at a family dinner, "Lexi is very beautiful. Daphne was very gifted." She hadn't said it cruelly. That somehow made it worse. Ethan told himself he didn't think about Daphne. He was mostly successful at this. The call came on a Wednesday from Tatum Rhodes. Daphne had finally hired Tatum 4 months in, when the divorce settlement's provisions revealed details she hadn't fully understood at signing. Tatum was a divorce and intellectual property attorney in Boston, precise and unhurried, with the stillness of someone who never wasted a word. "I was reviewing your prenuptial documents for a seminar," Tatum said, "and I found something." Daphne set down the mug she was holding. "The NDA Ethan's team drafted, the one covering IP developed during the marriage, contains a void clause. It's boilerplate, the kind that gets copy-pasted from legal template to template without anyone reading it carefully." A pause, the soft shuffle of papers. "It states that the assignment of intellectual property is void, where the originating party can demonstrate prior independent creation predating the marriage." The room narrowed. "You have prior independent creation," Tatum continued. "Your graduate thesis, your dated digital files, the emails to your thesis advisor and classmates, the sketchbooks. The concept behind Riverside Gardens existed before you ever met Ethan Caldwell. His NDA cannot legally assign it to him." "What does that mean?" Daphne asked, though she was already beginning to understand. "It means the Riverside Gardens design belongs to you. And because the valuation of Caldwell Properties IPO is significantly based on that design's value and reputation, you hold a legal claim against the core asset of his public offering." Silence. "But there's something else." Tatum's voice shifted slightly, tighter. "In the discovery documents I requested, there are internal emails from Ethan's legal team, from before you signed the NDA, a beat. They flagged the void clause. They identified it as a risk and sent the memo to Ethan directly." Daphne stopped breathing. "He read it," Tatum said. "He signed off on the final version anyway. He made a calculated decision that you would never find a lawyer sharp enough to catch it." The sound Daphne made then was small and not quite a word. It was the sound of a very old wound being correctly named for the first time. She had blamed herself. For months she had turned it over, what she had failed to notice, how she had been careless, how she should have read more carefully. But carelessness assumes the other person wasn't trying. This wasn't carelessness. This was something Ethan had done deliberately, with his name on a document, leaving a paper trail he'd believed she would never find. "Daphne," Tatum said, "you didn't miss anything. He hid it." She pressed her hand against her abdomen. The baby shifted. Not a kick yet, just presence, warmth, the quiet insistence of something alive. "What do we do?" she asked. "We file," Tatum said, "before the IPO closes." The labor started at 3 in the morning on a Thursday, 6 weeks early, low and steady at first, and then sharp enough that Daphne sat upright and knocked her phone off the nightstand, reaching for it. Jonas answered before the second ring. He arrived in 11 minutes. She counted. He came through the door, still in his coat, calm in the specific way of people who channel fear into efficiency, and he didn't make a production of any of it. He carried the bag she'd half-packed 3 weeks ago. He held her arm through the lobby. In the cab, his hand was there, when she needed something to grip and absent, when she needed to breathe through it herself, and she registered, somewhere beneath the pain, that this was exactly the right calibration. At Boston Medical, the neonatal team moved fast. Monitors, fetal heart rate, IV, the bright clinical rush of a room assembling itself around a problem. Jonas stayed at the edge of it, present, not in the way. When the contractions stacked without space between them, she found his hand again without looking. "You're doing it," he said quietly, close to her ear. "You're doing exactly what needs to be done." The baby came at 6:47 a.m. into the gray Boston morning, with a sound so fierce and indignant that Daphne laughed through tears she didn't remember starting. A girl. Small, red-faced, furious at the inconvenience of arrival. "Hi," Daphne said when they placed her daughter against her chest. "Hi, I know, we're okay now." She was the most extraordinary thing Daphne had ever seen. Jonas stood at the window with his back turned, giving her the moment, and when she said his name, he turned around with an expression she would think about for a long time afterward. Not the performance of an emotion, just the thing itself. Plain and undefended. "She looks like you," he said. Daphne laughed. "She looks like a very angry potato." "A very beautiful angry potato," he agreed. She was still in the hospital when the news broke. Tatum had filed the IP claim 2 days earlier, and the financial press had picked it up within hours. Not because anyone had leaked it, but because a claim against the central asset of one of the year's most anticipated IPOs moved on its own weight. By the time Daphne's daughter was 26 hours old, the story was on the front page of 3 financial newspapers. Designer claims Caldwell IPO built on stolen concept. IP dispute threatens Caldwell Properties offering. Who really designed the Riverside Gardens? Her nurse showed her the headlines with wide eyes. Daphne read them in the blue quiet of 4 a.m., while her daughter slept in the bassinet beside her, and she felt something she hadn't expected. Not triumph, not satisfaction exactly, more like the particular relief of a truth finally allowed to be its actual size, something that had existed for years and had been required to stay smaller than itself. Ethan Caldwell landed at Logan Airport at 2 in the afternoon on a flight he'd booked the moment his underwriters called. He had not slept. He had spent 12 hours fielding calls from his board, his lawyers, his investors, and Lexi, in that order, which was not a conscious prioritization, but whose sequence told him something he wasn't ready to think about. The board was cold. The underwriters were alarmed. Lexi had said, "I can't have this attached to my brand right now." Ethan and then gone quiet, in the way that meant she wouldn't stay quiet for long. He took a car directly to the hospital. He was told patient location was confidential. He didn't process this as a signal. He made it to the 4th floor before Jonas Beckett stepped out of a doorway and into his path. Ethan knew who Jonas was. Everyone in real estate and investment knew who Jonas Beckett was, a man whose judgment about what was worth building had made him both wealthy and trusted in ways those two things don't always coincide. "You don't have business here," Jonas said. Not loudly, not theatrically. "She's carrying my child," Ethan said. The words felt wrong in his mouth, like a claim he hadn't earned. "She had your child," Jonas said, 30 hours ago, without you." Something moved across Ethan's face. "I need to talk to her." "She doesn't need to talk to you." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I could have my lawyers." "Your lawyers," Jonas said calmly, "are currently explaining to your board why documented internal emails prove your team flagged the void clause before Daphne signed. I'd think carefully about what you want to escalate right now." The corridor held its silence. A cart moved somewhere down the hall, wheels on linoleum, unhurried. "I didn't," Ethan started and stopped. He hadn't thought about it the way it sounded stated plainly. He had looked at his legal team's memo and made a calculation. "She won't notice, she won't fight, she trusts me, it's fine." And he had not permitted himself the word theft because he had managed not to think about it clearly enough to name it. But standing in this hospital hallway with a man who had no reason to deceive him, Ethan understood, maybe for the first time without the buffer of his own management, what he had done. "She's not going to see you," Jonas said. "Not today. If she ever chooses to, that will be her decision." He stepped back into the room. The door closed. Ethan stood in the hallway for a long moment and then walked back to the elevator, because there was nothing left to reach for. Every version of force he raised in his mind turned back on him before he could lift it. The statement Daphne gave was not a press conference. It was 4 sentences, delivered to a single journalist from the architecture press. Not the financial outlets, not the gossip columns, at Tatum's suggestion, because the story should be told in the right language first. "I designed the Riverside Gardens concept as a graduate thesis project 8 years ago. I have the documentation. The design belongs to the work itself, and the work belongs to its origin. I am asking only for what was always mine." That was all. It was enough. The Caldwell Properties IPO was withdrawn pending investigation. Federal regulators opened a review of the IP concealment. Ethan's board voted to suspend his operational authority within a week. Lexi Farrow released a statement describing herself as deeply misled and confirmed the engagement was over, a fact most observers had deduced 4 days earlier. Eleanor Caldwell called Tatum's office and asked to be put in touch with Daphne. Not for legal reasons, she said, but because she owed her a conversation that should have happened years ago. Tatum relayed the message. Daphne said she would think about it. In the slow rhythms of the weeks that followed, the 2 a.m. feeds, the extraordinary smallness of fingers, the way sleep deprivation removes everything except what actually matters. Daphne found that she was not who she had been before. This was not a revelation. It was just something she noticed, the way you notice the light has changed. Jonas came often. Not every day, and not with any agenda beyond asking what she needed and being useful in whatever direction the answer pointed. He fixed the window latch that had never quite closed. He learned without being taught which hours were difficult and which were manageable. He brought takeout from a Thai place 2 blocks away that she had mentioned once, weeks ago, that she used to like. One evening she was sitting with her daughter asleep against her chest. That particular weight, that warmth, that gravity that rearranges everything you thought you knew about where the center of things is. And Jonas was at the other end of the couch, reading, when she said without planning to say it, "I didn't think I would get here." He looked up. "Not the baby," she said, "though that too, all of it." "Here," she gestured vaguely, meaning the room, the city, the version of herself that had signed papers in Portland and lost everything and had somehow ended up somewhere that felt, against all reasonable expectation, like enough. "You got here yourself," Jonas said. "Not entirely," she said. He held her gaze for a moment. "No," he allowed, "not entirely." Her daughter made a small sound in her sleep, the private language of dreaming infants, and both of them looked down at her without speaking, and the room was very quiet, and outside the Boston night did what November nights in Boston do, which is arrive early and stay long and fill up all the available dark with something that isn't quite loneliness and isn't quite peace, but is, if you let it, the beginning of one. The Stoics said that what stands in the way becomes the way, that the obstacle is the path. Daphne Harlow did not love what had been done to her. She did not have to. But she understood, in the bone-deep way that only comes after, that every drawing she had ever made, every curve of bioswale, every line of native grass, every sketch in a graduate school notebook belonging to a 29-year-old who had chosen Portland on a map and wanted to prove she could survive there, had led to a version of herself that no document could reassign to someone else's name. The work was always hers. It had just taken the world a little longer to know it. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever had someone claim what was yours and had to rebuild anyway, share it with someone who needs it today. Subscribe and stay close, because there's another story coming, and I have a feeling you'll want to be here when it does.